is the Bearcast, presented by Bird Culchion Ford. Bird Culchion Ford has been in Waco since 1936. Ford is the #1 selling truck in Texas 43 years running. The Bearcast is also presented by WellMed Medical Management and USMD Health System Dallas. Here's Craig Smoak and Grayson Grunddhoefer.
Good afternoon and welcome into a brand new edition of the Bearcast, this Valentine's Day edition here on Sikkim365.com, also on YouTube, 365 Sports, Baylor Bears on Sikkim365 as well. And if you haven't already, please go to the Baylor channel via Sikkim365 or Baylor Bears on Sikkim365, the YouTube channel. And if you haven't already, please hit the like button and subscribe if you would, as we continue to grow that page in addition to 365 Sports and all the other things that we have going on. But if you could be so kind on this Valentine's Day to show a little love, if you hadn't already in that way, then it would certainly be appreciated. And I don't make it a practice to ask all that often for things like that, but it's been a little while. So do appreciate all of you that are tuning in live, those of you listening taped as well. Craig Smoak with you, joined as always by Grayson Grunddhoefer. And Grayson, I'll spare you the happy Valentine's Day, but been a busy week, man. How you doing?
I'm good. Yeah, it's definitely been busy. I had a little vacation this weekend, which was nice, but still got some news as far as a commitment goes. So got to kind of keep tabs on that and post an article about that as well, which I know we're going to talk about later today. But yeah, it's been a good week overall. Lots of excitement on the basketball side of things, which has been fun to follow, and a new baseball season getting ready to start up as well.
Yes, Baylor men's basketball, I guess we could start there. Now in first place in the Big 12 after their win last night over West Virginia, 2-0 against the Mountaineers. Jalen Bridges gets his a little measure of revenge with wins in Morgantown, his old stomping grounds, and now in his new digs in Waco as well. So 2-0 against Bob Huggins and company. And as a result of, Texas Tech helping out, giving a little aid by knocking down, the Longhorns. And obviously you look around the rest of the league and it's been a very tight race, but despite this 0-3 start that Baylor found themselves in, they've been on an absolute tear over these last few weeks. They've gotten a little help like Texas Tech winning last night. And, man, you all of a sudden look up and here they are, and they are in first place in the conference with just, a few games now here remaining. And, Grayson, it's still going to be a tight race, but at 9-4, it's the Bears, it's the Longhorns. You've got Kansas at 8-4 now. You've got K-State, who started to sort of fade here down the second half as, they got off to such a red-hot start, and Jerome Tang was the flavor of the month, and now it's kind of cooled off a little bit. But K-State, Iowa State, Oak State, TCU, West Virginia. Here's Texas Tech now 3-10, who's won a couple here and, feeling a little bit better about their state of things. And then Oklahoma with Porter Moser dragging up the rear. And, that is what it is at this point. But I don't know how many people are, shocked by this, but given the 0-3 start, I think there's a lot of surprise. And obviously, if you're on the Baylor side of things, a lot of excitement about where the program finds itself right now.
Yeah, I think anytime you win 10 of your last 11, you're kind of achieving something great, especially in this conference. And so I don't think anyone expected them to win 10 of their next 11 after starting 0-3, but I will say I think that everyone expected them to turn it around, right, and play a much higher level of basketball. Now, the other part of it is you change one or two possessions in the TCU and Kansas State games. This team could be kind of cruising to an outright Big 12 title.
Or out of it entirely.
Well, yeah, if a couple things go differently in some other games, but those two games they just kind of circle because they were so early in the conference slate and they were such close games. But you're right, kind of looking ahead, thank you to Davion Harmon, who had a massive game against Texas last night, really allowed them to win that game, especially with his huge first half. And they also beat Kansas State this week. So two huge wins for them, and they really helped Baylor out because, like you said, now K-State is a game and a half, actually, out of first place. And Baylor's sitting there at 9-4, tied with Texas. They still get to play Texas in Waco coming up shortly. But the bigger thing for Baylor is they got road trips to Kansas and Kansas State coming up here in the next, week. So they're really going to have to continue to trend in the right direction. And who knows, if they win those two, I think they're going to be setting themselves up very nicely to win an outright conference championship.
Yeah, I mean, that'll be easier said than done. That will be a tough task, getting this little sunflower sweep that they'd like to get coming up here over the next few days. But let's just take a look back. I mean, you mentioned if you tweak a couple things here and there, they could find themselves in a different place. It's been a phenomenal run, winning 10 out of their last 11. You started off with the 15-point loss on the road in Ames, Iowa. You turn around, 1-point loss, brutal loss at home to TCU, and then the 2-point loss, another brutal loss to Jerome Tang and Kansas State that was at home. And there you were at 0-3. And since then, you've reeled off a win at Morgantown that got the ball rolling. You destroyed Oklahoma State at home. You beat Tech on the road in Lubbock by 7. You edged out Oklahoma in Norman, beat Kansas at home. Top 10 win there. Won your SEC challenge by the skin of your teeth against Arkansas in what was just an ugly game, but it was a win nonetheless, and obviously that was the crossover SEC challenge. I mean, but that right there, 6 wins after that 0-3 start, 5 of those in the Big 12. You lost to Texas. That was disappointing down in Austin, but a top 10 team there. And since that loss to UT, a 27-point win over Texas Tech, just destroyed them in that one. 10-point win over Oklahoma at home. And this past week, on the road, you knew TCU would be tough, although, Mike Miles has been banged up. Not their only injury by any means, but, TCU has been struggling with the health here as of late. And you get the 4-point win on the road in Fort Worth. Let's start there. Your thoughts on the win over TCU?
Yeah, they survived that game. And that was a game that was particularly ugly just because of how easy things looked for TCU at times on the offensive side. The fact that they just it was kind of one of those baffling things because it didn't feel like TCU could really make many jump shots at all. But the fact of the matter is they didn't need to. They had so many points in the paint. They just dominated Baylor in the paint. It felt like there was just kind of no answer for it. And that was a huge problem in that game. Thank the Lord for LJ Cryer and then, of course, Adam Flagler, especially in the second half, for essentially saving Baylor in that game. And in my eyes, saving their opportunity to still win an outright conference championship. So for them to go on the road there, come back late, they were down by 9 late in that game. But their 2 best shooters got really hot, played really well, propelled them. And they survived. And that was a game that I felt like they had to win. We kind of talked about this last week, how that Tech, Oklahoma, TCU, West Virginia stretch, they really needed to find a way to win all 4 of those. All 4 were very winnable, and Baylor did that. And I know we're only talking about the TCU game right now exclusively, but they survived that one. And that's really the only game they've had to survive in their last 4.
Yeah, Adam Flagler, LJ Cryer, as you mentioned, others certainly came up big at points as well. They had a couple injury scares this past week where it turned out to be like cramps or just not something as serious, but you got scared about Cryer there. Then Bridges, last night, you're like, oh my gosh, what's going on? Thankfully, he was okay in the long run, but Flagler and Cryer, man, I mean, they've been something else at various points, and those 2 coming up with the 4 Player of the Week honors so far this season for the Bears. Flagler doing it back in mid-November. The following week, LJ Cryer was your Player of the Week, and then here twice in the last 3 weeks or so, Cryer was your Player of the Week for a second time at the end of January, and here just yesterday, Adam Flagler gets his second nod as the Player of the Week. And Flagler, I don't think anybody blinked an eye if you were paying attention to his performances over these past couple of games and what garnered him the honor for this particular week. He's been sensational, just been fantastic, so well-deserved honor there.
I think he's put himself in probably second place for Big 12 Player of the Year.
Yeah, very well could.
I think the only one that's played better is Jalen Wilson at Kansas. And I know, some people might talk about Marquise Noel or Keontae Johnson there at K-State, but I don't think either of them have quite played to the level of those two guys, especially down the stretch. K-State's struggling a little bit, whereas the other two are kind of rising. But yeah, that's a credit to Flagler, because I think there were stretches, especially early in the season, where people really doubted his ability as a point guard and really doubted kind of the way that he was playing at times. And I think we're just continuing to see him grow, develop, get better and better, even more confident with his jump shot, more confident with the things that he can do on the basketball court. And it's really helping this Baylor team. And then obviously, you add in the fact that LJ Cryer is just on fire right now. They have this backcourt has been extremely deadly and potent. You got Langston Love starting to play really good basketball. And now really the only thing they're waiting for is Keontae George to get on a hot streak again, because he's been kind of cold shooting the ball in recent weeks, even though he had a nice bounce back game yesterday, I guess, as far as filling out the box score.
Yeah, I mean, having Everyday John back has been huge for them, as well as he's getting reacclimated. And I guess the most difficult part surrounding him is just people learning how to pronounce his name correctly. That has been the biggest battle. But outside of that, it's been, incredible to have him in the lineup and what all that provides for them as they are really in a good place. I mean, as you mentioned, LJ Cryer last night, let's talk about the win over West Virginia, because, we could be talking about maybe him setting himself up for a third player of the week honor. But 26 points last night versus the Mountaineers in 35 minutes of action, 8 of 11 from 3 for Cryer, as he was just sizzling. But he led the team in scoring there. Also, big from behind the arc. Bridges and George and Flagler all dumped in some shots from 3 as well. But Bridges with 12, Flagler with 13. You had Everyday John putting up double digits as well. And just a nice team effort. But the sweep of the Mountaineers, what were your thoughts on what wasn't like the biggest game, as far as they played ranked teams and all of that, and West Virginia's just kind of been there, I mean, quite honestly, but still a tough team. Any team you line up against in the Big 12, we know the deal. It's not, something that you take for granted, whoever you're lining up across. So to, have them come in, not with the sexiest record in the world, kind of struggling. Maybe you could have an off night or you just slip up, but it was at home. It was big to get this one behind you and get yourself ready for these challenges against the Kansas schools coming up here.
Yeah, I think my biggest takeaway, honestly, was what I saw from Everyday John. And I know we can talk about some of the other things, like LJ Cryer continues to shoot the ball well. We mentioned that a little bit earlier, and this is who he is. He's a great shooter, one of the best shooters Baylor's ever had. I really believe that. And, Flagler doing his thing, 6 assists, only 1 turnover. That's great to see. Jalen Bridges, 12 points against his former team. He played hard, played well. But Everyday John, simple fact of the matter is he is making shots that we have not seen him make consistently in his career on the offensive side. We know who he is defensively. We know he's going to give all this effort and consistency on the defense and rebounding. We know all that. But when he's shooting the 3-point shot fairly consistently, which he has since he's come back, and then we saw in this game, he was hitting turnaround jump shots in the paint. If he's doing that, they're going to be really, really tough to stop when it comes to March and the tournament and, trying to make a Final Four, because those type of shots that he was making are shots that I haven't seen a Baylor post make in a while. I'm trying to think of the last post where I felt confident that, a guy shooting a turnaround jump shot or getting a bucket in the paint. And the last one that I'm kind of thinking of really is Jonathan Motley. And I know Tristan Clark is probably in that conversation as well when he was healthy. But this was really impressive. He only played 24 minutes, had 11 points. But again, it was more the shot making and the ways that they could feed him, in which he could score through the offense and really allow them to establish themselves in the paint. Very impressed.
Give Terry Maston a shout, though.
Maston.
Yeah, Terry, that's true. Terry just couldn't stay on the court because he couldn't guard anybody. But yes, you're right. Shot making wise, Terry shooting threes for sure. Yeah, he's in that. He's in there as well.
And that was Jack McKenzie joining us. Sorry I didn't introduce you at the beginning, Jack, but he'll punish me later for that, I'm sure. Yeah, behind the scenes.
It is impressive though, the fact, because back then with Terry even, Baylor was still featuring their big guys, feeding them and really running the offense through them. I think this is cool because they didn't really run the offense through Everyday John. It just was more so when John found his spot, he took advantage. And so, again, really cool to see something that I guess I wasn't really expecting to see this year, him coming back from injury, but played 24 minutes. You can tell he's starting to get into more of a rhythm. And as he gets, more comfortable, more healthy, I think that's going to raise this ceiling for this team, absolutely. But outside of that, Keontae George continuing to kind of struggle a little bit scoring the basketball and the turnovers. He had 4 turnovers. But on the flip side, 9 rebounds, 7 assists, 4 steals. He did a lot of the dirty work, which was really fun to see and something that I think is going to be worth paying attention to going forward, because when he is having an off night, they really need him to stay connected and stay involved. And I felt like he did a great job of that last night against West Virginia.
So the Bears take care of business. They are now 9-4 overall in conference play, 20-6 now on the year. And gosh, I wish I would have held on to it. I saw a crazy stat earlier about their 20 wins, and I don't know if it was like a David K stat or if it was somebody else that had a mark, but you sit back, and I know everybody's appreciating like what's going on right now with the program, but it is ridiculous just the stretch run that they're on now. I mean, to hit the 20-win mark again is not something that you take for granted. To have the amount of talent rolling through that they have is pretty incredible. They just keep building on like their NBA transitions, and George will certainly be one of the headliners here coming up pretty soon. And others as well, as they just keep reloading with talent. But, yeah, I mean, to look up and find themselves in first place, but with a, very tough week coming up. So let's not, celebrate or anything like that just yet. But it's just remarkable what Scott Drew's built up and where he has this program clicking right now, which is on all cylinders. And then you look off the court as well. They acknowledged Flo Thamba, most wins in program history. Thought that was
that's awesome.
Pretty cool mark as well. And then, off the court, another, record of note, but Everyday John tweeting after the game last night, a Big 12 win plus getting accepted into Baylor's Master of Public Health program with a full scholarship equals great day.
Awesome.
So very cool accomplishment for Everyday John. And just big time. I'm sure that was, something that was celebrated along with the win last night and will be celebrated. But congrats to him on that, achievement. And congrats to the team on, a couple of big wins and this run that they've been on ever since that 0-3 start that has them in this position. So coming up, obviously a huge stretch here with, as you mentioned, the Kansas schools. And that will be first things first, a road trip to Lawrence to face number 5 Kansas coming up here at the end of the week, and then it'll be the Sunflower 2-step at Kansas State. So 2 top 10-ish teams, I guess. Kansas 5 right now, K-State number 12 right now. So huge week for this Baylor men's team.
Yeah, and I mean, so the Kansas game is on Saturday. So
we're not a huge week from here, yeah.
Right, so we're not going to get to kind of talk about that game again until it's completed. I think the K-State game's on Tuesday, so we'll get to preview that a little bit. But this Kansas game is a big one. And I know the expectation going into Allen Fieldhouse is just to compete, right? Because most teams don't go in there and beat Kansas. That's really, really tough. Baylor's only done that, one time that I can remember? Which was their national championship season.
Yeah, I think so.
So, yeah, it's just one of those kind of interesting opportunities for Baylor, and one that I think they can take advantage of. But on the flip side, Kansas is playing really good basketball right now. Kansas went to Kentucky, won. They beat Kansas State convincingly. They lost at Iowa State, which tends to happen to a lot of teams, including Baylor. And then they beat Texas and crushed Oklahoma last week. So I think both these teams are trending in a great direction. And there's some things Kansas can do that I think can really give Baylor problems with Jalen Wilson and Grady Dick. But on the flip side, I think Baylor's guards can really give Kansas problems as well. I'm excited. I think it's one of the biggest games of the college basketball season. I think both those teams are good enough to be 1 seeds. I don't think both will, but I think they're both good enough to be at that level, and both are also Final Four contenders in my eyes. So I'm very intrigued by that matchup coming up, and I expect Baylor to win one of these games, the Kansas and Kansas State game. and I'm kind of leaning towards the Kansas State game. For some reason, I think that, that Allen Fieldhouse magic might give them some problems. And it might end the run, which is totally okay because they can still win the conference even without winning that game.
Yeah, it'll be Kansas on Saturday on the road. That's one that, I don't have high hopes just based on the circumstances for them to win that one. I feel much better about them getting a win against K-State, who, like I said, is starting to come down from their early season high, where it was like they could do no wrong. They were winning every close game, and now it's funny, man. They lose like a couple games, and like the whole fan base is just like waffling all of a sudden, like where it was like Tang fever, Tang mania, all that, and then it's like they lose a couple games. It's like, I don't know, man. It's just the bubbles kind of had some air let out. It hadn't burst, but it's had some air let out. But yeah, Kansas closes out the week. K-State to start next week. Then home against Texas. So next week will be massive. And really from here on out, all games are huge. And then at Oklahoma State, who's played much better basketball. And then it'll be Iowa State, who's also started to kind of slow a little bit from their early season high, but still top 20. And who knows where they'll be here in a couple of weeks. But that's all that remains as far as the regular season goes. So 5 games to go. Tied for first place with the Jayhawks. You play them this weekend, so there will be some separation there. So fun times, stressful times, but this is what you sign up for with Big 12 basketball.
Yeah, and 2 notes on my mind, I guess, at this moment. I think 13-5 gets you an outright conference championship. I think 12-6 gets you a share. So if you're sitting at home, that's kind of what I'm gauging. Now, obviously, someone could play above that and do even better than that, maybe. But I think 12-6 will get you a share of the Big 12 championship this season. And then also a quick note, I was thinking this as I was saying this. The year they won the national championship, they went and played Kansas kind of after a COVID break. Or they were losing guys. You remember that? And they went to Kansas, lost that game, and still won the championship. It was actually the year before that Baylor went there and won in Lawrence. So quick correction there.
What, 2020?
2019, 2020. When the tournament got canceled, I believe. That's right?
I think so, yeah.
That was the year it got canceled.
Life since that period of time is all like very foggy as far as like times and dates, and I mean it really is like a before and after kind of thing with the COVID deal. My memory since then is not quite what it was before, but yeah, as far as the lineup, I think that's right. Yeah. So to go and get a second win there would obviously be huge, and that's what they'll be looking to do here coming up this weekend. But yeah, I just had that in front of me as well. Let's see here. The win in Lawrence, I had that a second ago, and I think that was 2020. Is that what you said?
2019, 2020.
Yeah, I think that's when exactly that was. But, yeah, should be a lot of fun. 67-55 win on January 11th of 2020. That was the big win in Lawrence, Kansas. So
they played so well in that game. I remember it vividly. It was on CBS at noon. It was that kind of primetime spot on a Saturday, I think. Great game, and that was Jared Butler. That was kind of when they really got on the map for, oh dang, Baylor's really, really good.
Since then, lost by 13, and then lost by, what was that, 24, I guess it was, last year against Kansas.
And the 13-point loss was the national championship year, right? Yeah, and I'm pretty sure, and that was the year where they went into it just with all kinds of COVID problems and like had a time off and then had to go play in Lawrence. Bad timing, but hey, Baylor won the national championship, so can't complain.
No, can't complain about much right there. So that's what they've got in front of them coming up this week, and like I said, it should be a heck of a lot of fun. Big 12 men's basketball will be just lights out when tournament time comes, and that'll be, the bang will be worth the bucks spent for tournament passes or whoever goes up to Kansas City to check that out. I can't imagine there's a better tournament to go and check out if you're a hoops fan than the Big 12 men's tournament. And on the women's side of things, it's been a struggle, man. They had a really ugly week last week. I mean, it was not good. Had an opportunity against Oklahoma to beat the Sooners and to have a little bit of a win streak going and to carve into, the standings, and instead just choke it away. I mean, I don't know how else to really – I don't want to dress it up too much, but that's basically what they did. It could not close out the Sooners there at the end, and that was a really tough loss, and you wondered how much that would possibly stick with them. And Nikki Collin, made no bones about the fact that was, some emotional baggage that they brought with them, following that game, and you saw them, head into the weekend and have an opportunity to kind of stick around and, bounce back and show that was just a bad ending and not so much an indictment on sort of the direction that they're going. But unfortunately, they followed that up not just with a loss, but a 21-point loss on the road to Oklahoma State. So what looked like it was going to be a big top 15, top 20 win against the Sooners, and then, whatever you do against the Cowgirls, whatever you do, we could have, talked about it from that angle. But instead it turns into a bad loss to a top 15, 20 Sooner squad, and then a blowout loss to Oklahoma State. So two in a row, and now Kansas State coming up this weekend in Manhattan, and then Iowa State coming up on Saturday at the Farrell Center. But 16-8 overall, now 7-5 in conference play. And what do you make of this Baylor women's team right now?
Yeah, really unfortunate week, and kind of the biggest issue is you really need to win one of those. It didn't really matter which one, but you needed to win one of those games to really feel like you still had a shot to win the conference, because now Texas is 11-3. Yep. You're a full 3 games out. You're probably not going to catch them.
You're pretty done, yeah.
Yeah, you're pretty done when it comes to winning the Big 12. Now, on the flip side, this is the reason why I say you wanted to win one of those, because here's what they got coming up. In 3 of their next 4, they play the 3 worst teams in the Big 12, including 0-13 TCU. They're going to win that game. They have 4-8 Tech and 3-9 Kansas State. Also on the docket, you have an Iowa State team that's been reeling a little bit, not playing their best basketball, and you just beat them on the road last week or a week and a half ago. So you really had this opportunity to potentially win, 5 of your next 6 or 4 in a row here during this stretch and really give yourself a chance heading into that game in Austin against Texas. But now it kind of feels like even if you went out, then you have a chance, right? Then you have a chance. But I still find that to be highly unlikely. But I will say there's an opportunity here to at least win 3 of your next 4 and maybe finish winning 4 of your last 6, which would be a great place to finish. But they just need to, like we've talked about, start playing their best basketball at some point. They need to have more consistency, because at times it feels like, hey, a nice winning streak, then a bad loss or 2. Then a nice winning streak, then a bad loss or 2. Can they really put a couple wins together and start playing really good basketball here in the next few weeks leading into March? That's probably to be determined. But I do think there's a lot on the line here as far as it comes to seeding and potential to, make a run in the Big 12 tournament or the NCAA tournament as well. But there's a lot of games left, a lot of winnable games left on the docket for this women's basketball team.
Yeah, Dariana Little Page Buggs has been a bright spot. She got honored again by the Big 12 this week. I think that's like a month straight of her being honored as, freshman of the week. Mm-hmm. And so, there's some bright spots, but man, that was a really bad week. Like, I'm not going to sugarcoat it. That was a really bad couple of losses they took. And that Oklahoma game was there and ripe for the picking, and just let it slip through their fingers. And then again, turned around and got beat up pretty good by the Cowgirls. So we will see how emotionally, physically, mentally they respond to those losses. But again, Kansas State coming up on Wednesday, Iowa State on Saturday. First things first, a trip to Manhattan before the Cyclones at home. Then they have TCU on the road. They've got Texas Tech at home, Texas on the road, and then West Virginia at home. So that's what awaits the Baylor women's team here over these last 3 weeks of the regular season. And, we'll see where it all shakes out in the end. But as you mentioned, Texas kind of coasting at this point, as they did lose their most recent game. Did lose their most recent game. Oklahoma's been pretty hot, so Oklahoma State's been pretty hot. So at least with the 2 teams you lost to, they have been teams that are on a little bit of streaks right now. But Texas and Oklahoma, that's pretty much the 2-team race. You need both of them to kind of slip a couple times, and everybody else to basically win out, which would be Iowa State, Baylor, Oklahoma State, that are all there a couple games back. But right now it's the Longhorns and it's the Sooners at the top of the standings. So we'll see. But yeah, didn't help your efforts with the efforts last week. But that is impressive though. Dariana Littlepage-Buggs, she's been good for them, and that is a young player. And they've got, more than her alone, but she has been somebody that's consistently week in and week out being mentioned in the honors, and so that's something to build off of. So that's where they are at the moment. Meanwhile, and I do have some football stuff I want to get to, but I kind of just want to close with all of that instead of kind of starting with it. So before we dive fully into some of the football notes, including a brand new commit, including some combine invites, you wanted to touch on baseball. And, obviously Mitch Thompson back as a member of the program, and not just as a member of the program, but this time as the head coach after a successful stint as an assistant, then obviously left, built a, pretty a powerhouse really at McLennan, just down the road, and really enjoyed talking to him when he was the manager out there and following along with their success. But then obviously Bears decided to make a change. Move on from Steve Rodriguez. Here comes Mitch Thompson. There's a lot of excitement that he's back in green and gold, and that, they're going to just kind of have a little bit more buzz with this baseball program, but not very high expectations. And I saw his interview that he did, I guess, on Media Day or whatever it was, one of his first interviews for the, season kickoff. And they got a chip on their shoulder being picked ninth, but he's, understanding, but it is like a little bee in his bonnet. He made no bones about that. We've had, good write-up on the site from Levi. Caraway had a good piece on Mitch Thompson and Baylor baseball. So your thoughts on, the squad as they get ready to get this journey with their brand new manager underway.
Yeah, and Levi also posted a season preview on the website as well, so be sure to check that out on Sikkim 365 Premium side. But yeah, Baylor's picked ninth by D1 Baseball. I don't think that that's unfair. They have a lot of transfers coming in, so I understand why they're picked there. And it kind of makes sense. Now, that doesn't mean that Baylor's going to finish ninth. Matter of fact, I think kind of the more that I look at it, I still think Baylor can find a way to go, something like 10-14 in league play, which might not be great, but I think in year one, that's kind of my more realistic prediction. I think is something like 10-14, which would put you probably at like 7th in the Big 12, maybe higher than that, depending on how things shake up. But yeah, I mean, first year is going to be really one of those interesting times. Baylor needed a change. The baseball program, I think, needed a move in a new direction, as Steve Rodriguez really, really struggled in postseason play and struggled as of recent years to kind of put it all together. So I'm glad they made the change, but things are going to start off, with a bang, because they're playing a Central Michigan team that hasn't won less than 42 games since 2018. So a really good program coming to Waco. Central Michigan went 43-19 last year. They lost to Florida twice in the Gainesville Regional. That's how their season ended a year ago. So Baylor's going to get tested in their first series this weekend, and I'm very excited to see how they kind of come out and respond, how the pitching rotation shapes up, and also just with all these transfers, just how they all kind of mesh and come together in year one, and to see if they just are more productive and better than they have been, especially last year where they struggled so mightily.
Yeah, I mean, Steve Rodriguez did some good things, but by the end of it, it felt like, they probably needed to just take a little bit of a break. They got really screwed over by COVID, as we, for some reason, mentioned that a couple of times in today's episode. But, I mean, you do have to acknowledge that there towards the tail end of his tenure. He's now on the staff at Texas. And, Mitch Thompson's brought back some familiar faces, some names that if you followed the program, you should be familiar with. And he's also, been on a little bit of a, welcome tour or season kickoff tour, and, run into a lot of old faces on those as well, as you see some of the pictures coming out of those events. And just seems like a lot of the alums are excited for, him to be at the helm and to see what that brings. And so he's got that support, and that should, help carry him some of the way. But how the team performs and taking them the rest of it this season, not super high expectations as we mentioned, but for them, they definitely are taking that number 9 slot as a challenge, and they will look to starting here this week, change minds and prove otherwise. But yeah, I'm very excited. He's a great baseball mind. We mentioned MCC under his leadership was pretty electric and very successful. So if he can bring a bit of that, that will be, some big talking points in future podcasts for sure. But looking forward to that journey starting for Baylor baseball. And elsewhere, spring just kind of depends on where you look, dabbling around tennis. Both programs not coming off the best weeks. But for a lot of that stuff, you can check out my Good, Bad, Ugly. I have like some small summaries each week over on the website. Sikkim365.com, and then we've got various posts and commentary on a lot of that. But spring is rolling on, and now I guess the only thing that we need to know, with baseball getting underway and softball's now underway, they got off to a pretty good start in the UNLV tournament, 4-1 in their first week. So on and so forth. A&T's underway, and all of that is we need some football dates. We have no idea when spring football starts, although probably somewhere in the next 5 to 6 weeks, the next month to 6 weeks is the time frame it'll kind of have to be, because it's usually always sometime in March that you get underway and then have your spring game in April. So we're closing in on that, but no idea just yet on when that'll get underway, nor Pro Day. We don't have a date on Pro Day either, but again, will have to be basically in the next month to 6 weeks in order for it to work out with the draft. And when it comes to that, looking at the football notes side of things, draft-wise, 2 combine invites. Siaki Ika, big nose tackle, and Connor Galvin, your big left tackle, on opposite sides of the line, had a lot of battles during practices and a lot of mutual respect, and 2 guys who are really kind of carrying the torch for this draft class. After last year was more than a handful of guys that you had to keep your eye on. You had 6 guys who were invited to the combine. It is a much thinner class this year. Those 2, Ika and Galvin, really the only 2 that you could put money on and feel confident that you'll hear their name called at the draft later this spring. But to get combine invites, no surprise for Ika. Not really a huge surprise for Galvin, although I do feel like Galvin has sort of built up some steam and built up some momentum from his all-star showing to now getting this invite. We'll see what he does, obviously, at the Combine in Indianapolis here in a few weeks. But I think that was important for him and a good sign of sort of where he's projected. We know with Ika, it's anywhere from probably late first to somewhere in the second round. But he's done no workouts. He skipped the Senior Bowl. I don't know what his, status has been as far as just getting healthy, or if he's dealt with some health issues. Don't really know. He's just kind of been closed camp since the bowl game, and that was a game he didn't play in. So really, we haven't heard from Siaki Ika since the Texas loss at the end of the regular season. So he's been getting ready. Galvin's obviously been very active. They're both going to Indy. And for, some of the others, you're looking at maybe some undrafted free agent guys. Probably, though, some guys who will be well served by the fact that the XFL's back and by the fact that there's all these other leagues. It'll remain to be seen, but really eyeing kind of a 2-man draft class here for the Bears.
Yeah, and I still think there's some sneaky possibility that, a Ben Sims.
Sure, there's possibilities.
Khalil Keith, but you're right. In general, we're pretty much focused on those 2 guys. And I think the good news for Connor Galvin getting invited to the Combine is most times when you're invited to the Combine, unless you just have a terrible showing, you're probably going to get drafted. And so I think that's great news for him, because I do think he was on the fence as far as getting that invite or not. But really happy for Apu that he's going there and is actually going to hopefully run and compete in the Combine, even though I don't know how much that would help him, to be honest. Because really, for a guy like him, you need to turn on the film and you really know what you're getting with Apu. But yeah, excited for both of them. Excited to watch the Combine again. Again, like you said, the draft class won't be as deep as it was a year ago. But it makes sense. This was a 6-7 team, not a 12-2 Big 12 and Sugar Bowl champ team. So it kind of adds up, right?
It's reflective of kind of just the whole 2022 Baylor football team. In comparison to the year prior, you were already dealing with the highest of expectations because a lot of benchmarks were set, and you didn't really plan on probably living up to most of those. But yeah, it's just, I wrote an article, and I think that you still need to drum up some excitement and support the guys who are involved, but you could certainly sense that there's not as much buzz because there's not JT Woods and Jalen Petrie and Kalen Barnes, like all these guys you want to rattle off. And there's been some big combine moments, the last couple of years as well. So not going to be quite to that level, much quieter this time around, but two guys who should get drafted. And yes, maybe a Ben Sims sneaks in there or a Khalil Keith, someone along those lines in later rounds. But congrats to Ika and Galvin on getting invited to the NFL Combine, which is in Indianapolis here in the next couple of 2 to 3 weeks. That'll get underway. Elsewhere, football-wise, another commit for the 2024 class, as we just talked about the past. Now we await word on the present as far as, spring ball and as far as what the dates on the calendar are going to look like as far as the offseason preparations go, so we can start to fully cover that here over the next month. But in terms of the future, there's news there as well as edge rusher Brock Jackson made his commitment to the Bears after a junior day visit. And this was part of, the big weekend they had about a week and a half ago. There wasn't a bunch of commits at that time, but there's been kind of a slow leak of, a couple since that time period, Grayson, and we know this is not going to be the largest class in the world either, so I think it's notable, how many get on board and how quickly early on, because this isn't on paper going to be like a 22-man class. This is going to be more of a 15-ish, 16, and we'll see. It usually always grows, but for right now, there's not a lot of room, so here's a new addition, number 3 overall for 2024. What do you like? What can you tell us about Brock Jackson?
Yep, so Jaden Porter, Colton Siraki, and now Brock Jackson. That brings you to 3 in the 2024 class. Like you mentioned, right now, the number that's kind of being, I think, worked with is 15 or 16 for this class. It will grow. It's probably going to end up at 20, would be my guess. 19 or 20. It always does, unless Baylor decides to use a lot of room for transfers, which they might, because they've had a lot of success in that regard. But as far as Brock goes, this is a guy that Baylor's been in a great position to land for a long time. They offered him back in May. I put in my prediction for him back in May as well, because it just seemed like everything was leaning towards Baylor. But his recruitment, kind of moved a little bit. Arkansas, Missouri, Texas Tech, Colorado, Houston, all offered. So I think that caused him to wait a little bit, want to take some visits, want to look around a little bit more. But then he took his junior day visit, called Baylor the front runner in his recruitment after that. And that pretty much made it known that, okay, he's getting close, at least, to deciding. I didn't necessarily know he was going to decide this early, though. I thought there was a chance he might wait till after the dead period, but obviously he felt comfortable with his decision. No time to take visits during February, so might as well make a decision. Now, what's Baylor getting with Brock Jackson? So he's 6'4", right around 235, 240 is kind of where he's at. Some have listed him at, as low as 6'3", 220. I have seen him in person. I think he's much closer to at least 235, 240 pounds.
Are people buying different measuring tapes? What's going on here?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it depends on where you get measured and things like that. But
I can get the weight fluctuates, but the height you think would be pretty.
You would think
on board,
right?
But
okay. I mean, I've seen guys who I'm a true 6'2". You stand up against the thing barefoot, I'm over a little bit over 6'2", and some of these guys that I see are just towering over me, and they're like, "Yeah, I'm listed at 6'2", and I'm like, "There's no way." There's just I don't know who's measuring you, but you need new measuring tape, because a lot of these guys are very, very tall. But yeah, for him, I'd say right around 6'3", 6'4", 240 pounds. That's kind of where I'm at, which leads to a great question, because he could play defensive end. He could. But he is being recruited as a jack. Caleb Collins has been recruiting him very hard. But I think with his weight and his size already, there's a chance he could be, 6'4", 280 pounds, and then you're playing defensive end. So he gives them a lot of versatility there in that regard. Good pass rusher. He's got 11 sacks over the last 2 seasons. Been very productive. 35 tackles for loss. I think he's right around 138 tackles during this time as well, and 8 forced fumbles during the last 2 seasons. So he's really been productive at Lumberton. Very good player, like I said, very good prospect. His versatility is very intriguing. To the fact they could play jack or defensive end. Great pickup, and one that I feel like Baylor really needed, because he just makes a lot of sense for this class. He fits the culture at Baylor as well. And then he's also great friends with, in my eyes, one of, if not the best linebacker in the state, Anthony Smith out of Jasper, who's also been a fairly heavy lean towards Baylor, but his recruitment has blown up a ton. So that's just another thing to keep an eye on when it comes to Brock Jackson potentially being a leader in this class and a guy who could go out and recruit other guys to join this Baylor 2024 class.
So a big pickup. Obviously, there's the initial celebration, and then there's the white knuckling ride, especially with guys that are going to probably get more and more attention along the way of holding on to them. But to get the pledge first is a big deal. So good for Dave Aranda and staff to go on down there in the that Beaumont Golden Triangle, Southeast Texas area, Lumberton just north of Beaumont. So dipping down there, that's a playground for a lot of great athletes. And I just mentioned Kalen Barnes a few minutes ago, kind of heading down in his area, and Baylor certainly struck gold down there a few times. So hopefully that is the case as well with Brock Jackson. But yes, he is the latest commit number 3 for the class of 2024. That's where we now are, believe it or not. And we will see how the numbers fluctuate as far as scholarships go, but that is big question mark because you don't know what kind of attrition's in store and don't want to guesstimate too much on how that goes because that can be very flimsy number. Just don't really know how to peg that exactly. But working with let's start with 15 bare minimum and then know that it'll probably grow from there. So 3 in and still a bit of a journey to go to fill out the rest of that class. But that was big news. Elsewhere in football, also what was big news really conference-wide was the fact that Texas and Oklahoma have officially found their exit path from the Big 12 this upcoming season. We know that Baylor will host Texas at the end of September, and that will be the last meeting with the Longhorns for the foreseeable future. You could always play them in the Big 12 championship game. That's a possibility. No Oklahoma on the schedule, but again, you could play them in the Big 12 championship game. You're certainly, though, going to play Texas. You're going to play them in Waco, probably for the final time for a long time. And I would imagine that makes that a pretty hot ticket, and that'll be a wild first month of the season, as we outlined, I think, in the last couple of podcasts when the schedule is released. They could be like a really super impressive top 15, 5-0, or they could be like 2-3 and trying to figure out, again, okay, how do they make a bowl game? How do they win 4 out of their last 7 to get to 6 wins? I mean, that first month of the season is going to be something else, Grayson, but that's for many other conversations down the way. Let's focus on that piece of news that I mentioned, which is Oklahoma and Texas getting out, making a deal with the Big 12. They're not going to have to pay the full amount. There's a lot of details as far as how the money is going to be, paid, where it comes from, and all of that. But the basic gist of it is this is the answer we've been all Big 12-related folks waiting on for quite some time. And now we all know, everybody involved, that this will be the one and only year with this, bigger Big 12. And then starting next season, 2024, season after next, you will get to your new Big 12. Exclusively, Oklahoma and Texas will be in the SEC. USC, UCLA will be in the Big 10. So 2024 will be the start of a new era, but got to get to 2023 first. So your thoughts on the swan song for the Horns and the Sooners?
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy that it's finally over, that they're finally gone. There was a lot of awkward tension. I could just kind of feel that it was building, right, between these programs in the Big 12. And we saw it with the schedule release. They didn't release anything about it. No excitement there about the upcoming season playing that schedule, which is funny to me because we all know they absolutely care about what the results are next year. So why you wouldn't release that doesn't make any sense unless you're trying to make a statement to the Big 12. That's all they were trying to do, because they promptly released all kinds of stuff when they were announced to the SEC. So again, a lot of pettiness there. I think that,
can't believe the Big 12 put a gun to their head, made them join the SEC.
Yeah, I know, and that's the funniest part. They made the decision. Yeah, it makes no sense to me that they're acting this way, but they are. They're acting this way because they wanted to force the Big 12's hand, and the Big 12 and Brett Yormark just sat there and said, okay, well, here's how you do it, and we're not going to move from this. You're going to pay us the money that we're owed, and then you can leave to the SEC, and that's exactly what they did. Very happy it's done. We don't need this season's going to be awkward enough. We don't need another awkward season after that. They clearly didn't want to be here. The Big 12 didn't want them here, so it's time to move on. And I'm glad that's happening. Great for Oklahoma, great for Texas, great for the SEC, and great for the Big 12 getting that $100 million, which will be, according to Ross Dellinger, distributed to the 8 legacy schools. So Baylor's one of those, which is nice.
Yeah, they'll get a little piece of that. I think it all rounds out to like $10 million per school when all is said and done. So it's not quite the full amount that you would have liked. That was like the $160 million, and that would have been nice, but that's not how this usually works. There's usually a bit of a, an arrangement, and that's obviously what was going on. There was some jostling between the two.
And they have to pay Fox back in some way, whether it's inventory of games or money. So that's probably where the other $69 million.
Well, and that's going to be the Michigan-Texas game is what that's going to be, which will now be in Ann Arbor. They flipped the dates, so instead of it being in Austin, it'll be in Ann Arbor first, and Fox gets that, and that's how Fox is made whole. So, yeah, that's all the details of how it worked out. But in the end, all you need to know is, they came to an agreement. So last year coming up for Oklahoma and Texas. Anything else before we dive into the mailbag here?
No, let's do it. We got a few questions, but they're good ones.
All right, so starting off here, let's go to Dak JD90. What are the odds we had transfers post-spring for football? Do we have room? If so, what positions do you expect us to go after? I'm assuming we would be going after players that lost their position battles in the spring like USF did to get Gary Bohannon last year.
Yeah, I think the odds are pretty high that they'll add at least one transfer if that's kind of the baseline. They're going to add someone else, maybe a couple other guys as once the spring's over, once they kind of figure out what positions they need to address coming off of the spring, and then also kind of figure out who's available and who lost a position battle, like you mentioned, and where can they find a prospect that could come in and help them right away. So, yes, you're right on that. Now, as far as, and I mean, it could also be new coach comes in and the guys who waited decide they don't get along with that new coach, and then they decide to leave. It's not just about losing a position battle, but as far as positions go, I guess specifically, I think center is one that we've mentioned a ton. Timothy Dawn is slated to be the starting center. I just think it'd be nice to give him another year or two to grow and mature and maybe bring in a veteran because it worked really well when they brought in Jacob Gall. I think someone like that could be really helpful for the offensive line. I think another cornerback might be an area they look at. Potentially a field safety if they can find one in the portal to be, the next JT Woods in this defense. And then maybe even a defensive lineman because they're kind of thin there. So those are the positions that I'm looking at currently. I'd mentioned wide receiver as well. That'll probably come down to how good Keytron Jackson and Hal Presley look in the spring.
Yeah, I mean, a lot will be dictated by the spring. You need to see these guys out there and see what you got. And, to answer any future questions, because I think we get, and Dak, I do appreciate it, but get a lot of what are the odds of they're going to add transfers. And they'll find their room if they need to find the room. But, yeah, I think it's just a matter of, you went and just added 10 guys, and then you count they just signed in the last 2 months 30 new players. Mm-hmm. So, I think they have an idea of what they have, but they still need to see it out on the field. And, some guys are coming from high school, some guys are coming from other colleges, and they've got varying degrees of experience at those colleges and varying levels of experience, with those programs. And so, they'll unpack that all, and by the end of spring, they'll have an idea of we probably need another wide receiver. And last year, to be very fair, they, whiffed on kind of their evaluation of the roster. To be perfectly honest, in some areas they thought they had better than they had, or thought they had adequate enough and clearly didn't, or had expectations that weren't met. And as a result, you saw some of the struggles you saw last year. So I'd imagine they'll be, hawk-eyed on this roster come spring and post-spring and go and attack whatever deficiencies they see fit. But, yeah, they'll be active if they need to be active. And if they stay pat, then I think that probably bodes pretty well for the most part that they like what they have.
Yeah, it's very clear based on the additions they made during the offseason that they're not just going to stand there and wait for the talent to develop on the roster.
Yeah.
If they see that there's a problem, that someone's not ready to be a key contributor for this team, then they're going to have to go out and try to find someone who can be. And that's just kind of the way things are right now, is this team needs to improve drastically. They went 6-7 last year. That's not great. They need to get better.
And there's a path to that very easily with the schedule as well, despite the fact you've got 8 home games. Because
it's possible, yeah.
I mean, that first month, again, that's going to be a real tone setter. That's not going to be that finalized version of that team, but they're going to have to avoid like the slow ramp up of the season, because if you slow play that start or you get off to a slow start, then like I said a few moments ago, you could be like 2-3 after the month of September with some, road trips, not very much in terms of volume, but like Manhattan and Fort Worth and places you don't feel super confident in winning ball games necessarily. Yeah. That early stretch will be imperative. But Dak, it'll be really. There's lots of interesting storylines coming out of spring, but the roster and kind of how Aranda talks about that whenever we get an opportunity to ask him some questions, and we get to ask him about their double-digit number of transfers and the newcomers and how they might contribute. I'm very curious to hear some of his initial impressions on that, because it's been a while since we've heard from him, and certainly it'll be the first time talking about this version of this team, because the last time we spoke, it was us thawing off in the post game at TCU following the bowl game. And so his thoughts were very much on that not so fun present, but we have not heard him talk about the future at great length just yet. So looking forward to that here in the next few weeks. Thank you for the question, Dak. Papa Bear, what overall ranking should we expect for the 24 football class with 15 to 20 recruits? What about composite ranking?
Yeah, I'm thinking like top 30. With that little, maybe even top 35, I think is what you should expect. They were right on pace to get a top 25 class, and then obviously the Novosad thing happened, and that kind of derailed their chances there. But yeah, I mean, if you're only going to take 15 guys, to be inside the top 30 would be a really, really good class. So probably, somewhere in there, top 30, top 35 is kind of my expectation.
C's here. Scotty B, the Baylor King, on a scale of 1 to 10 in terms of least relieved to most relieved at the news of Texas and Oklahoma leaving the Big 12 after the 2023-2024 athletic year. 10 for me, because now we know that the conference schedule will be a one-off schedule with 14 teams during the 23-24 athletic year, and we just kind of touched on this a moment ago. But on a scale of 1 to 10, least relieved to most relieved, where are you, Grayson?
Yeah, 10, because it was annoying and awkward and just needed to be changed. And it was something Brett Yormark said needed to be addressed. He needed to figure out the Texas and Oklahoma issue. That was one of his 3 big things. And so now he's got that done, and he's got the media deal done. So he's got 2 of the 3, and his third one is more expansion. And so that's kind of the step that he's on now.
Which I didn't bring up because we could get into the endless speculation on poaching the Pac or what that could look like. We start talking trash about the Pac-12 TV deal or lack thereof, and we could get down that whole rabbit hole. We'll save that, though, for the afternoon show. But, yeah, I mean, they're eyeing expansion, and to what degree that's, heading west. That's pretty safe bet is they're going to head west or look west, because he's made that clear. But, I mean,
at least to some extent.
What teams are that? Are they talking about involved there? Is it the Arizona schools? Is it another combination? Is it somebody we're not thinking of? Yeah, like is it Gonzaga in basketball? All that remains to be seen, but does make it more difficult if you have 2 years of this weirdness with Oklahoma and Texas. So on a relief scale, I'm probably at 10, and obviously, I think Oklahoma and Texas would say that they're a 10 as well to have the clarity that they do. So I think it was a win-win for pretty much everybody when all was said and done. Thank you, Scotty. Master Pierce, MPH, this sport often gets overlooked, but how big is it to get a crack at number 1 Oklahoma softball here at the Getterman Classic this weekend? Do you have any overall thoughts on our results and potential so far this season?
I mean, I don't think it's a good thing, personally. I mean, and it's not to be, super pessimistic, but the fact of the matter is Oklahoma has dominated the softball sport, and they're really, really good again. I think they're the unanimous number 1 team in the nation right now. They're undefeated. I just, it's not great when you got to play them 4 times in a season, or at least 4 times in a season. So, I mean, I guess it's big that they get a chance to beat them at home, but I would be shocked if they beat Oklahoma this weekend. Now, as far as overall thoughts, they were picked 4th in the Big 12. I think that's about right. I think they're a good team. I think they're a potential tournament team. I think they should make the tournament this year. But as far as playing Oklahoma this week, I don't know if that's a big thing for this program.
Yeah, I mean, it's a big opportunity, but I don't know if it's going to result in a big win, because Oklahoma is an absolute juggernaut. But, yeah, I mean, as far as a non-conference early season game, that's not going to have too much of an effect other than if you win, or just get embarrassingly blown out, which I don't expect. Yeah, I mean, it's a good measuring stick game, and it's a good, like I said, opportunity. If you can somehow find a way to pull out a win, that would be massive and unexpected. But that's a great opponent that should hopefully draw a really great crowd at Getterman. That's kind of the first thing I think of. But a nice start for them out in Las Vegas. 4-1, fell in the championship game, unfortunately, but still 4-1's a nice way to get things kicked off, especially on the road.
Yeah, and they got votes this week to be in the top 25. They're just on the outside looking in, and their loss was to the number 4 team in the country now, Arkansas. So, they're playing good softball, and that's what you want to see. You want to see them playing well. No matter what the result is against Oklahoma, most teams aren't going to beat Oklahoma this year. So for them to get a crack at them in a tournament situation where they might be pitching, their third or fourth pitcher, that might be, a positive way to spend this.
All right, so final question here, Alpha Needle. Let's go backwards here. Given this is Coach Mitch's first year as baseball coach, what are realistic expectations for the baseball team this year?
I think realistic is if they can get to 30 wins and go 10-14 in the Big 12. Expectations is such a strong word, but I think, my expectations is that the program looks like a program that is trending towards having a good future. And I don't think you can put a record on that. I think it's probably more so about them playing competitive baseball throughout the entire season, just not rolling over and getting blown out, especially late in the year if things aren't trending in a great direction. I think that's the bigger thing for me more than just a record prediction.
Yeah, I mean, I think that sounds respectable and fair enough. To be kind of 500-ish in the Big 12, I think, as a first season would not be that bad, especially given that you were picked 9th. But, no grand expectations, just competitive play with a bit of fire. Just the basics, really, that everybody wants to see out of their programs. Just, look like you're having fun out there, right? That kind of thing. Just look like you're improving on a week-to-week basis, and I have no doubts that they will with Mitch Thompson. I do think that they're probably being a little slighted just based on where he's coming from. And I don't know, nothing super disrespectful, but I could see them finishing better than 9th.
Yeah.
So that's the challenge, and that's what they'll hold on to and keep as a chip on their shoulder.
I think the roster overhaul is another big reason why they're picked, because you just don't know what to expect from transfers.
That's fair. Yeah, I mean, a ton of movement, and that's obviously just college sports in general these days, but especially with a new coach, you're going to have a lot of turnover. And especially in a sport like baseball with its scholarships and all that, it's going to be a far different looking team this year, and just in how many different ways that'll be part of the fun. So final question here, Alpha Needle, how would you rank the recruiting classes in football from 2017 to 2023? Not what 247 or Rivals ranks, but your view, rank them 1 through 7, with 1 being the highest. Grayson, I'll leave this to you. I have not gone and looked back over every recruiting class since 2017, so have at it here.
So I want to do this more of compiling it together, just because it's really unfair to say, the 2023 class compared to 2017 when they had, Jalen Petrie and guys who we've already seen their career play out. That it's just kind of tough to compare them. So I'm going to add a little bit of that, but also just add in just kind of my thoughts on the overall prospects when they were recruited in those classes. So I think 2023 and 2022 are actually the 2 best classes during this run. I think they're very good, very deep. I think a lot of those guys will be really good players for Baylor in the future. It's just tough to say it right now, right? Because we haven't seen all that much production from those 2 classes up to this point. Then I have 2017. Great talent. You got the all-time Baylor sack leader in that group with James Lynch. You got Ebner and Abram Smith, Terrell Bernard. That was a great class. One of those classes that really built Baylor to win a Big 12 championship. And since we've seen their career play out, it's hard to not put that at 1. But I'm not going to, because there's also some guys in that class who just straight up did not play at Baylor and did not make it. So 2021 is 4th. 2018 is 5th, 2019 is 6th, and then 2020 is actually my lowest rated class. A lot of guys in those 4 classes that just did not play at Baylor, a lot of guys who, transferred out, got injured, just a kind of a rough stretch in there. And each one has a position or 2 they really addressed, but also each one has a position or 2 where they just completely flopped. And I think that's what makes a great class is if you can be balanced. And so I think those top 3 are a little bit separated from those bottom 4.
All right, so hopefully that answered your question, Alpha Needle. I just didn't go and well, first of all, I didn't see your question until like 3 minutes ago, so I haven't rolled through the comparisons of the classes and all that. So that's why I left it to Grayson, and hopefully that was an adequate answer for you. But yeah, interesting to kind of look back over the last 7 or so years, and you know, obviously a couple of different head coaches in that time frame, and it feels like many different seasons and storylines and all sorts of stuff with those recruiting classes. But yeah, fun to look back from time to time. So like I said, hopefully that satisfied your question, and we do appreciate you being a regular member of the podcast each and every week. Grayson, anything before we sign off here?
Yeah, I got a quick question in the chat that I want to address. He just asked, how do you see Baylor using the backfield by committee? Who gets the most carries? I think we've talked about this in the past, so I just wanted to quickly address it. I think we're both on the same page that Richard Reese is going to be the lead back, with Dom Richardson being kind of that second bell cow mix-in running back. And I think in this specific team, you're probably going to see a third guy emerge, whether it's Quaylen again, or maybe a Bryson Washington, or Jordan Jenkins, or a guy like that. But I think those top 2, I feel pretty good about being the top 2 running backs on this team.
Yeah, I mean, you brought in Dominic Richardson to play some significant snaps, and last year, yeah, Richard Reese was kind of a one-man show once Tay McWilliams got hurt early, and Quaylen Jones was just sort of sparingly used, a lot as a blocker,
Squirrel got
sometimes
hurt
as a pass catcher. But yeah, Squirrel Williams gets hurt, and he was very much in and out on any given week. We really never knew what game he was suiting up for and which games he was out for. I mean, it was kind of just a crapshoot. So, yeah, I couldn't rely on him as much as you'd like to. And so, yeah, it was basically just the true freshman out there doing the majority of the work. And as we saw by the end of the year, that had taken its toll. So I think they're going to be much deeper and much smarter as well with kind of how they divvy out the carry. So, yeah, I'd expect Dominic Richardson will have a huge role along with Richard Reese. Quaylen Jones being back helps. And then, yeah, eventually see which one of these young guys is going to start taking some snaps as well. Jenkins and Washington, you mentioned there. But, you know,
Quaylen's still there too. We mentioned him. But
Who?
He's Quaylen. He's
yeah,
still
no,
there
he's very
as a
much
third
there.
guy,
Yeah,
so.
he's very much going to be involved. So, yeah, to what extent the young guys are able to carve out some carries besides the early season stuff that you typically expect, they're not even going to have that opportunity so much. They'll have a couple games to maybe have some of the, like the Long Island game. You'd expect, so, you know, second and third team guys to get as many meaningful snaps as they could. But beyond that, yeah, it's Utah, Texas in that first month. So we will see. But, yeah, that's Dominic Richardson and Richard Reese, and then a sprinkling of others is pretty much going to be what I would expect. So thank you for that question as well. All right, that'll wrap it up here for us here on the Bearcast. Thanks to Jack McKenzie. Thanks to Grayson Grunddhoefer. Thanks to you for listening. Thanks to those of you passing along questions as well. And we will be back next Tuesday at noon. But also check out, if you haven't already, hitting the thumbs up and subscribe to the 365 channel, the Baylor channel, and also 365 Sports. We'll be back at 365 Sports at 3 o'clock this afternoon. Talk to you then. It's been the Bearcast on SicEm365.com.